With how ironically cool these have become, these things might be a future investment. IKEA's sofa department could take a tip from these seats because this thing, it is so comfortable. Look, there's no mistaking this is a big car. It does feel large to drive.
Look, I know that sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, but you've got to remember they're 20 years old now, so you are going to have a lot of problems.
Okay, in this video, we're going to take you through all of the common issues with these iconic things. We're going to show you how they're aging. We're going to show you what they're like to live with and drive. But most importantly, we're going to tell you if you should buy one or not. Let's do this. Okay, now before we get into all of that, if you're not from Australia or New Zealand, the Ford AU Falcon is an absolute bloody Aussie icon in all of its different forms. And it was manufactured here at a time that many consider to be the peak of Australian automotive manufacturing. And to beat its large family car arch nemesis in the incredibly popular VT Holden Commodore, Ford threw everything at the AU. And yet it sort of failed, at least in terms of sales and popularity. Plus, even though the AU only technically existed for 4 years, you still see heaps of these on Aussie roads. Now, the AU has been available across 3 different iterations as a sedan, a wagon, or a ute. Plus that AU title, it extends past the Falcon to the far schmancier Falcon, this, the Fairmont, and the schmancier still, Fairlane. Although the Fairlane is quite different to this, and it really does deserve its own video, which we'll get to down the track. Now, power is sent to the rear wheels via either a 6 or 8 cylinder petrol engine in various states of tune. And fun fact, this 6-cylinder is technically the iconic Barra's dad. I should also add, in this particular car, it's a VCT, that's special, and it's a Tickford VCT, that's even more special. Now, do you want some options? Because my God, with these, don't you have some options? The normal AUs are available in 12 different flavors, utes in 13. These cover everything from fleet sale and hire car classics like the Forte through to fire-breathing performance-focused XR8 models. The Fairmont luckily keeps things far more simple with just 2 flavors, although even these can kind of vary depending on the options. But if you want something arguably more special and far more serious, the Tickford enhanced TE50 and TS50 might just float your boat. Now, if you do need all the specific details of all of these different trim specs, head to ReDriven.com and check out the cheat sheet. It's completely free and it's going to answer all of your questions. Now, even though that cheat sheet is completely free, these things generally aren't. And my God, doesn't the pricing vary enormously? At the low end of the spectrum, the cheapest hopefully road registered ones kick off from around about $2,000, even $1,500. At the other end of the spectrum, a mint condition TS50, they're asking well over $45,000. Now that might seem like a whole lot of cash for an AU Falcon, but with how ironically cool these have become, these things might be a future investment. So therefore, if you're looking at buying one of these, you need the best possible finance package, and to do that, click the Driver link down there. Driver will find you the very best finance package from dozens of different lenders. There are no hidden fees, and there's no need to talk to a complete stranger about your personal finances because the entire thing is done online. Plus, if you do all of that via the link down there, we're going to give you a free $150 fuel voucher. Now, under these incredibly polarizing looks lies some class-leading engineering, but the problem is, no matter how delicious a meal is, if it looks like shit, no one's going to eat it. And that's kind of what happened with the AU. Because of the way it looks, it was a sales flop. But funnily enough, in the same way stupid looking mullets have made a bit of a comeback, these things are gaining some traction again. Pardon the pun. Now, Ford did adjust the looks over those different updates, but no matter what, because it's got kind of these droopy eyes and tail lights, it just looks sad all the time. Plus, besides just the looks, there are a bunch of other issues with the exterior, but we'll take you through all of that really soon. Now, the different trim specs will adjust the aesthetics a little bit. For example, the XR models, they have a quad headlight design instead of these headlights. But interestingly, the really high performance Tickford models, they just stuck with the old sad eyes here. They didn't do the quad headlights. But no matter which AU you're looking at, don't expect to get blown away with the amount of equipment you're going to receive because these things are pretty basic. Although there are a couple of surprises. At the lowest end of the spectrum, you're going to get a pretty horrible sounding 4-speaker stereo, air conditioning, remote central locking, power mirrors, and not a whole lot more. The Series 2 improved the stereo, included a CD player plus all of this. The XRs, they received some leather here and there, cruise control and sportier seats. But if you want all of the bells and whistles, you need one of these. Although when I say all of the bells and whistles, it's more like bell and whistle. Let's not get carried away. Fairmonts, they add wood paneling and analog clock, climate control, and all of this and more. And then the Fairmont gear, it adds all of this, so basically like a really good stereo and more premium materials. However, there were some really interesting options like this mobile office table with integrated cup holder. How cool is that? Also, again guys, for all of the details on which AU gets what stuff, ReDriven.com, check out the cheat sheet. Plus, if you want to update the tech with Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, good news, this is a standard double DIN fascia, so fitting that sort of stuff is a piece of piss. But look, while we're in here, how's the interior? Well, firstly, it's incredibly spacious, but I feel like Ford had a monumental fear of straight lines because everything is curvy or ovals. And unfortunately, well, at least for me, I don't find it that attractive. In fact, the standard AU's center console, I feel it kind of looks a bit like Gary Oldman's face from the movie Hannibal, so it's not exactly like inviting to touch. And hey Ford, look, I appreciate you trying to fool us into thinking that the Fairmont feels premium with its wood grain trim, but it doesn't. Although in saying that, each different trim spec will feel different inside because the materials obviously change. But a quick warning, if you're looking at one with a full leather interior like this, be careful during summer because the backs of your legs might end up with 3rd-degree burns. Now, while the materials might vary between the different models, one thing that doesn't vary across the entire range is just how comfortable these things are. Honestly, like IKEA's sofa department could take a tip from these seats because this thing, it is so comfortable. And then there's the wear and tear, at least in this particular car. For the age of this thing, it's got well over 200,000 Ks on it. Excellent wear and tear. Okay, the leather is a little bit firm, but that can be restored, but all the plastics feel really good. Okay, the gear selector and the steering wheel, they've completely lost their texture, but that's to be expected. But even the carpets are in pretty good shape. I'm impressed. And then in terms of practicality, you've got an okay sized glove box there. You've got a spot kind of for your phone, sort of kind of there, but this car was invented before these phones were. Ashtray, cigarette lighter, yuck. You've got a cup holder section here with a little flip out divider. You've got a good little storage cubby hole here with spots for your CDs and your coins. You've got rubbish sized door bins. Also in the doors, some of these, the actual armrest can flip up and have little storage cubby holes under here. Not on this car. That's it for storage up front. Now, speaking of immense abilities hiding underneath a less than good looking exterior, I'm exactly 13 centimeters taller than actor Steve Buscemi. This is my driving position. This might be the most comfortable back seat I've ever sat in. You just sink into the rear seat. The seating position is perfect. There's heaps of space. It feels spacious. Maybe ultimate back seat, maybe. As far as the wear and tear goes back here, not a whole lot. Like the leather still feels super, super supple. Carpets are good, plastics are good, backs of the seats are good. God, I'm so impressed. Then as far as practicality in the back seat goes, you've got a couple of air vents, a little light there. You've got 2 map pockets, fittingly, with a map in it. You've got rubbish size door bins and you've got a pull down armrest with 2 cup holders. Then as far as practicality in the boot goes, guys, stacks. This thing is huge back here, plus the seats fold forward, giving you even more practicality. I should also mention, I spent thousands of kilometers driving an AU Forte wagon around Australia with drums and PA systems in the back of it. And I tell you what, those things give like current SUVs a run for their money when it comes to practicality. Plus, these things are renowned for their towing ability. Super practical. Okay, so what's it like to drive? Well, have you ever tried to cut a loaf of bread with a chef's knife or a butter knife, and then you cut it with an actual bread knife, and you understand that using a tool that was engineered and designed specifically for a job just makes sense? That's what driving the AU is like. See, the AU was designed and engineered for our conditions, and you can instantly tell. It feels like you could just eat up kilometers for days on end, which is probably why so many AUs on the used market have north of 300,000 Ks on them. Look, there's no mistaking this is a big car. It does feel large to drive, but it kind of feels large in a good way, like you're driving a luxury land yacht. And because it was designed for our conditions, like in this particular car, it does help that this car has been cared for, but there are hardly any rattles. There are very few weird noises or like strange squeaks. It feels so tight. Now, there are a couple of reasons why these things drive so much better than you're expecting. Firstly, this being a Fairmont gear means that it has double wishbone independent front suspension, front and rear, and that was a huge deal at the time. And even now, after this many years and this many kilometers, it just still feels and rides perfectly, beautifully. Secondly, the engine. Look, while the world mourns the loss of the naturally aspirated V8, we totally get it. Let's spare a thought for 6-cylinder engines, because this thing, it's just so smooth. Like, power delivery is just linear. It's like melting butter. It's just a beautiful power plant. Look, obviously this thing isn't a performance car, but it will get you out of a hole quick, smart, like pulling into traffic, overtaking, all done totally effortlessly. Towing does it brilliantly. The only drama with that is that you are going to be spending let's say a copious amount of money on fuel when you do flex that right foot. Now we should mention not every AU out there is going to have this independent suspension setup. Plenty of them have a live rear axle, and the wagons and the utes, they've got a leaf spring setup. And I should mention, and I know this from experience, driving a wagon in the wet with nothing in the back, those things will go sideways faster than you can blink. Now, obviously, that isn't all of that safe. And funnily enough, speaking of safety, Ford did upgrade the brakes from the Series 2 onwards. Actually, in saying that, Ford also increased the levels of safety depending on the trim spec and the more recent, the AU. Actually, you know what? How about we let the most Aussie guy that I personally know tell you about the safety features? It's my mate, Dave.
Righto, AU safety shit. From the start, there was bugger all, an airbag for the driver, an ABS, but only for the future or an up. And that was it, seriously. But the Series 2 chucked a couple of airbags in the front. All of them got ABS, and the seatbelts got them pre-tensioners and stuff. The Fairmont's got all the good shit from the Falcon, but they have traction control too. Like you're ever gonna turn that on. Basically, right, it's a pretty fucking dangerous car. They go sideways like your old man smashes cold ones, and if you're buying one, chances are you're a bit of a dickhead, so you'll probably crash the seriously, but don't drive like a dickhead.
Okay, welcome to the unfortunate part of the video. What goes wrong with these things? Let's start with the exterior. First up, unfortunately, it's rust. Where do you need to check? Just here. But let's go over the key areas. First of all, around the doors and around the door seals all around. Also, under anything, rubber. Check under all of this stuff because, man, you'll start seeing corrosion. Also, check around the actual door hinge area. Check underneath the sills and along the chassis rails. Actually, basically anywhere under the car as well. Okay, this next one is really frustrating. Rust can form behind the front guard. The problem is, to find that rust, you've got to remove the front guard. I don't know how many sellers are going to let you do that. But what you can do is pop the bonnet and have a look around like the strut towers on both sides. Look at where any kind of seams meet. Just look for any signs of brown stains or corrosion. Next up, if you can, check the base of the windscreen. Actually, you know what? Check all around the windscreen, including the A pillars. Maybe do the B pillars and the C pillars as well. But the real issue with rust is in the boot area, especially down here where the bottom of the gas struts meet the car, and also down in this hole, kind of where the hinge disappears into the car. Incredibly common for corrosion to start to eat the car from inside down there. Also on the boot lid, along this leading edge here under the number plate, and also under here. In fact, check the entire boot, like around the seams and everywhere, for rust. In fact, look, you know what? The entire bloody thing can be guilty of rust. So if you are looking at one, go over it with a fine-tooth comb. A bit of surface rust here and there, that's not necessarily the end of the world, but anything serious, we'd be walking away. Find another one. Also, like plenty of other cars, worn out wiper blades are just bloody dangerous. Luckily, Wiper Tech has you covered. Guys, the blades are easy to order online, they're easy to fit, they're shipped to your door, also for free via that link, and you're gonna get 15% off, and they are genuinely some of the best wiper blades we've ever used. Now, elsewhere on the exterior, basically anything that has electricity running to it, so we're talking door lock actuators, power windows, power mirrors, anything with electricity running to it, starting to have a few problems now. The good news is, but fixing that stuff is generally pretty cheap and easy to do. Many owners are complaining that their headlights are yellowing really easily, but again, pretty cheap and easy fix. But something that isn't cheap and easy to fix is the fact that on a lot of AUs, the clear coat is starting to fade or even peel off. The problem here is respraying it in clear coat or respraying the entire car or getting the entire car wrapped is going to cost thousands if it's done properly. Luckily, like this one, there are examples out there that have been cared for and look pretty bloody good. Okay, problems inside. These seat bolsters are known to collapse if they're used a lot by, let's say, heavier people. Plenty of owners have reported that there are some electronic gremlins. For example, the window switches, they can fail, but the good news here is just gunk on the actual connectors and it's super easy and cheap to fix. The infotainment systems or the stereos in these, they pretty much suck these days, so yeah, you're gonna have to replace it anyway. Then there's the genetic Ford Falcon issue of the roof linings sagging. I feel like Ford probably had a solution to this, but then realized, oh, hang on, it's a Falcon. The roof lining, it has to sag. And then there are just a bunch of other smaller sporadic issues. For example, in this car, the interior driver's door handle, it doesn't work anymore. The good news is a lot of these little problems are pretty easy and cheap to fix. And to learn how to fix these things, the best thing to do is join owners groups. We did join owners groups to do the research for this video, and the owners groups were phenomenal help, especially Lucas, Sean, Paul, and Mark. You guys, legends. Also, a huge thank you to David and Alex for lending us your Fairmont. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, now mechanically, what goes wrong with the AU Falcon? Well, I'm not qualified to tell you, I'm sorry, but Jim is because he's a mechanic.
Some say the Intech 6-cylinder in the AU is a better engine than the Barra. Well, I probably wouldn't go that far, but I would say for their time, they're actually a bloody good thing. And as for the V8, we're actually waiting for one of you guys to lend us a XR8, so then we'll do the V8. Now back to the 6-cylinder, look, they did have a problem with head gaskets, but even that wasn't as bad as the EL and EF Falcons, but yeah, they did blow head gaskets occasionally. And speaking of leaking gaskets, the inlet manifold gasket is pretty problematic on these. More so back in the day, but the modern gaskets are better. The gasket would just basically break up and allow a vacuum leak at the manifold, and it would run terribly. Very common problem on these. Okay, at the front of the engine, they are known for having some drive belt issues and some tensioner complications. And some of those drive belt problems can be made worse by oil pissing out of the timing cover and the timing chain tension O-ring, a very common place for these things to leak oil. Ignition coils, very common cause of misfires, as are the ignition leads. A lot of modern cars just don't have them, but these things did, and they used to fail a lot. Look, a lot of people driving these now, and especially the people drifting them, complain that they overheat a lot. Look, the cooling systems in these are 20 years old, so everything is pretty much fucked, especially the cooling system, so of course they're going to overheat. But they also did always have a problem with the O-ring that goes into the thermostat housing and the back of the water pump. They've always leaked, very common problem. And some of the people driving these or drifting these also complained that the power steering pumps are a problem and the alternator's a problem. Look, they always were somewhat problematic on these, but the reason these two components are a problem now is you're driving it on the rev limiter at full lock and the power steering pressure relief valve is going off its head. Power steering fluid boils over and dribbles straight on the alternator, and then it's too. Yeah, so they are problematic. Of course, that's more of a problem for the people drifting, obviously. Other power steering issues are leaking high pressure lines and the power steering pressure switch on the steering rack. They've always leaked. And just on those pressure switches, I think every old school mechanic I know has a spanner bent specifically to do those pressure switches. Yeah, they were a big problem back in the day. Another common problem in these is the old milkshake in the cooling system and milkshake in the transmission oil. The problem here is the transmission cooler that is in the radiator. Well, when it leaks, you get cross-contamination between the transmission fluid and the coolant, and they both turn into chocolate milkshakes. It can be easily repaired by just replacing it, but a better option is to put a aftermarket oil cooler in front of the radiator. That'll take care of that. But you must flush out both the transmission and the cooling system, and believe me, once that oil gets messed up, it's really hard to clean out. The actual automatic transmission in these, the BTR unit, it's actually pretty good, pretty stout unit. They do suffer from solenoid and valve body issues, and the rear extension housing bush often fails as well. The manual transmission, the T5, again, pretty strong unit, but they do suffer when guys go drifting in them, so they are braking a lot, but back in the day, they were actually pretty reliable. Further down the driveline, the tail shaft centre bearing, look, that has always been a problem in all Falcons forever, so keep an eye on that. You'll just hear a thudding noise when you're accelerating. The diffs on these things too, they often blow up, and even the ones that are just being driven generally on the road, they have a tendency to have bearing issues as well, and partly because people never change the oil. The ones that have been well serviced typically have less diff problems. Suspension wise, look, these Falcons have always had issues with their front ball joints. You can expect to change them frequently, and if you don't pick it up, they can actually just fall out while you're driving, and it's pretty messy. These, like a whole bunch of other Falcons before and after it, had a lot of front wheel bearing issues. The front brakes on the Series 1 AU were much smaller than the Series 2 and 3, and they had a tendency to overheat and just warp terribly and cause terrible brake shudder. It was fixed later in the AU2 and AU3. Just about all of them have got a broken bonnet latch, just a design flaw. You need a pair of vice grips to open the bonnet and pull the cable. Another problem to look out for, especially in the manuals, is the firewall is a bit weak and flexes from the clutch pedal, and sometimes that firewall can crack, so keep an eye out for that as well. Look, I know that sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, but you've got to remember they're 20 years old now, so you are going to have a lot of problems. The good thing is, because they're 20 years old, mechanically they're fairly simple, so they're easy to fix, basically, usually most of the time, and parts are pretty affordable too. There's always one being, dismantled on Marketplace, so they're not a bad enthusiast or do-it-yourself car.
Okay, so should you buy one? Look, We would normally say it depends on your situation and the example that you're looking at. But you know what? As long as the AU you're looking at isn't a complete rust bucket and you have a mechanic give it the once over and give you a thumbs up, yeah, you should buy an AU. Anyway, it would be kind of un-Australian not to buy an AU. The AU is Australia personified in a car. Like our population, it's available in a huge range of colours and shapes and sizes. Depending on the circumstance, the AU and Australians can be inappropriate and far from sensible. We're both often polarising, and let's be honest, both can be bloody unattractive. But deep down, just like Australia and our people, the AU is just a solid, great value, no-nonsense workhorse that will get the job done, all while putting a bit of a smile on your face. Although there is another Aussie classic that you should also probably check out, is this one. But if you wouldn't buy this or that, what would you buy instead? Let us know in the comments. See you next time. If you're not from Australia, what are my hands doing? An analog climate control?
Now I know that sounds like a